The Ways and Means Committee meeting will be called to order. Mr. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Davis, Alderman Moore, Alderman Vaccaro, Alderwoman Howard, Alderwoman Murphy, Alderwoman Boyd, Alderman Muhammad, Chairman Williamson.
Here.
We have four present.
Thank you. We have one agenda today, and that would be St. Louis Finance. The police department is here. We're welcome to have the police commissioner here, and also the public safety director. So glad to have you here, gentlemen. So you're welcome to come up to begin a presentation concerning the police department. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairperson.
Good morning.
Members of the committee, thank you very much. My name is Jimmy Edwards. I'm the Director of Public Safety. We're here this morning to review the budget for the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. Let me just indicate at the outset that our budget submitted this year has been scrutinized very carefully, and we believe that we're submitting a very lean budget on behalf of the police department. You will be aware that our biggest issue from the last fiscal year's budget was the overtime issue, and we will address the overtime issue as a result of the unrest that occurred in our city. I can tell you that the overtime issue is being addressed very specifically and very carefully by the current chief of police. I will ask that our Commissioner of Police, John Hayden, have an opportunity to give you an overview of what's going on inside of the police's budget. Also present is Mr. Dave Daniels, who is the accountant person or the budget person inside of the police department, and he is also available to answer any questions that you might have. Also present this morning is Charlene Deacon, who is the Deputy Director of Public Safety. So we all are here to try to address any issues or questions that you might have. At this time, if it's permitted, I will invite the Chief of Police to address you at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you, members of the Ways and Means Committee. I appreciate this opportunity to share with you. The police department has been scrutinized for its use of overtime, as Judge Edwards mentioned. He and I both have taken steps to reduce the use of overtime since I became chief. Actually, the first day on the job was January the 1st, 2018. And we are building on those efforts that had begun to take effect under interim Chief O'Toole. While we certainly exceed our overtime budget this year, it has been balanced by commensurate savings in salaries due to our deficit in officers, which is actually 128 officers short. Our efforts to reduce overtime has been significant declines in period over time usage. These declines are shown on the listed table. I believe that you all may have a copy of it, but it just shows you a comparison of me taking the helm. It goes from January 21st is the first period, 16, and it compares the savings between this time last year. I can see for the first line it has so January 21st in fiscal year 2017, that amount was $19,315. Same period of time for this year is $10,474, and it goes on down the list, but that's the comparison we prepared for you. I will remind everyone that the former mayor stated that the police department had unlimited overtime. The former police commissioner seemed to have taken that at face value and told his commanders that he would not challenge them on their use of overtime. This resulted in higher than necessary expenditures. So as the judge mentioned, there's been a change in the tone at the top, and our commanders are much more judicious and frugal with respect to their overtime usage. I understand that there are times that I must use overtime to address particular situations, but I am also aware that my officers work too much, or that if my officers work too much overtime, their performance and personal well-being may suffer. I also plan to continue to work with the Department of Personnel to comply with city policies on overtime usage. We continue to have issues with retaining and attracting officers to the department. I already mentioned we're 128 officers down as of this date. I truly appreciate that our officers will receive the raise of $6,000 across the board upon passage of the new pay ordinance. This will really help our officers and their families. The director and the Police Foundation, in conjunction with the mayor's office, has taken a big step in helping attract new officers by starting or restarting our cadet program. The purpose of this program is to identify interested young men and women under the age of 21 to learn about policing while both earning compensation on a part-time basis and receiving assistance with tuition expenses. The department had a cadet program in the past that brought in quality recruits, and we hope through this new program that we will build a strong pipeline of motivated young people with a love of this community who will fulfill their passion for law enforcement with a career with the St. Louis Police Department. I also want to make you aware of a similar issue we're experiencing with attracting and retaining police dispatchers. Their salaries are significantly lower than their counterparts in St. Louis County. The county pays a starting salary of $40,539 to its dispatchers. After the completion of their probationary period, our dispatchers make $30,394. We have some particular needs that will not be met by this budget. Our vehicle laptops have outlived their useful lives and require replacement. A vehicle laptop costs approximately $2,200, with the components costing another $650 for a total of $2,850. This to replace them in all of our vehicles that currently have them would be approximately $740,000. The amount budgeted for communication services is insufficient to meet the data and communications need and commitments of the department. And we also need a systems development manager restored to our budget. This was an improved position and was inadvertently cut during the budget process. This position is presently filled by an employee who manages all of our programmers and analysts. I would like to thank the members of the committee with meeting with me today, and I will now answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. We appreciate it. I just got a few questions, and then I guess we'll go ahead and down the road with the other aldermen and alderwomen ask questions. So this year you have approximately $9 million in overtime, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Did you say $9 million, sir?
Yes, sir.
I believe that's correct.
Okay. And having that amount of overtime in the budget, if it's a normal year, no protesting and what have you, do you think that's enough money to cover the St. Louis Police Department when it comes to overtime? What's your approximation on that? I'm sorry? You think that's about the right amount is what you're saying?
If we could be promised there would be no protest, a large scale protest, that should be about the right amount.
Okay.
Chairman, may I
Yes, sir.
elaborate a little bit? With respect to this overtime issue, we have been very lucky to develop a partnership with the federal government and the federal law enforcement.
Okay.
And so they have helped us and assisted us in terms of some warrant. Sorry. They have assisted us with respect to search warrants and arrest of certain individuals in the city of St. Louis. That federal partnership has proven to be very important and has undoubtedly has helped us to reduce the need for some overtime. And as the chief mentioned, overtime is no longer something that is determined by the rank and file. That overtime now has to be approved by commanders, and that is a significant change from last year. So we're making significant steps in controlling better the use of overtime.
Okay, good. And that was kind of a follow-up to my next question. Let me ask this one first. Now, providing if we only spend a certain amount of the overtime, let's say if it's 3, 4, 5 million left in the budget, does that flip over to next year, fiscal year? It doesn't. So where does that money go? Yeah, I mean, if there's something left in the pot.
If there's something left in the pot, it will get returned to the general fund.
Okay.
So your fund balance.
I got
So
you.
anything in anyone's budget that isn't spent or encumbered will automatically go back to the general fund.
General fund budget, right, general revenue. Okay, very good. And my next question is, You know, I know I've been getting pounded questions with some of the residents in my community about the overtime and the case that have been taking places with some of the police officers being accused or allegedly accused of stealing overtime, and I think you have followed up with that, Mr. Director of Public Safety. How are we really, as a department, correcting that problem if there are, and it may not be, but the way the media kind of put a spin on it, it was theft that was taking place when it came to the overtime. So what's being done to make those provisions so that won't happen?
With respect to any officer engaging in any type of criminal activity, it is my hope that they will be investigated by our Internal Affairs Division, and if there is sufficient probable cause, then those cases then will be presented to the appropriate prosecuting attorney's offices. The matter that you're speaking about occurred a few years ago involving Jost, Officer Jost, along with 3 others. That was a federal state task force, and the feds, of course, was involved with paying that overtime that was allegedly being stolen because the officers were not working the exact times that they claimed that they were working. Now, that case was heard by one of the circuit judges last week by way of a bench trial, while the circuit judge determined that there was not sufficient evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to convict the officers of forgery. The judge very, very specifically and very carefully indicated in the order that it does not mean that there was not enough evidence to prove that the behaviors of the officers violated the integrity of the police department.
All right, very good. This is my last question, and it's concerning probably toward the chief, the commissioner. Your rank and file, and you know, your men and women do an excellent job, majority of them. I'm pro-police, got all due respect for them. And I know you've had a problem maintaining your low-ranking file. It seems that, and, you know, hopefully we can stop the bleeding. Some of the young officers come on, they work 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, and then they leave to another municipality once they get the experience, which, you know, it's good to get good experience with the City of St. Louis Police Department. And so it's become a problem with your high-ranking, you know, officer as well. Let me put it this way. Your top heavy is what I'm hearing. So you got quite a few sergeants, lieutenants, captains, and then, you know, no fault of your own. I know this hand was dealt to you. And when you have your lower ranking file leaving department, I guess that does present a problem when officers are promoted, and when you're getting quite a few chiefs and all the Indians are leaving. So in your opinion, what are you doing, or what is your police department doing to try to encourage to keep young officers on the force? And I don't know if it's legal, if we can do that, if we can have them sign a contract where they have to maybe stay 7 to 10 years, you know, to, you know, try to stabilize our department. So just your opinion on that. Yes, sir.
So, again, I mentioned that certainly I think that we would be facing a lot more serious issue, crisis related, if Prop P hadn't passed. I think that the county has always been 6,000 or so ahead of us. That's been something ever since I've been on the police department. So there was always a greater pay in the county, but it didn't stop officers from still being interested in the St. Louis Police Department. And so I think that was a big step in the right direction. We already mentioned the cadet program, but the Police Foundation has increased funding for more radio time and ability to do more job fairs. So our recruitment efforts, in the basic recruitment efforts have been expanded, and that's been monies from the Police Foundation. And then lastly, the Ethical Society of Police has actually stepped up to the plate and have made sure that they have a pre-academy program. I think they graduated 26 people or so within the last month. But the point being is that there have been some folks that have struggled while in the academy. Hey, although it's only a high school equivalency or a high school diploma to qualify there for the academy, there's a lot of writing involved. There's a lot of computer work that's involved, and so again, Ethical stepped up to the plate and actually is providing some pre-academy training, so kind of identify potential weaknesses that people might have.
Very good.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Alderwoman Davis.
I just have a couple of questions. Good morning.
Good morning.
My first question is about the overtime. In normal circumstances, when you're dealing with a budget and you're talking about whatever your parameters require overtime to be done, when it gets over 10% of your actual payroll, I'm not talking about everything else that's in the budget, I'm just talking about payroll, then you have to look at operations. And so even though we are attesting to, we are down by 100+ police officers, when we look at the size of our community, we really are adequate based on all other cities and their numbers. So how are we going to realign our workforce? You see, I know a lot of people get promoted because they want more money and because it's available for promotions. But if we had some steps involved where a person would be happy being a police officer if they saw some improvement in their pay, they wouldn't push so hard, because we can't continue where we are. We've got to put some people out on the streets, and I know you've started that, but can we go further?
Absolutely, we can go further. Like I said, we are certainly looking to streamline all of our detective bureaus. Again, you meant the question is whether or not we could operate, at 1,000 people. I guess the key issue to that is that there's a study that's conducted pretty much annually, and I'm trying to think of the university, but they compare us to all of the major cities that have commensurate size, and I think that our need for at least those numbers that we're short, in other words, for us to bring to authorized strength, are pretty legitimate and standard. I mean, hey, we come out of a year when we've had a record number of homicides, and just because a city can be compared per capita, the issue is that if we have more poverty, for example, which drives a lot of crime, or if we have more drug activity, which drives a lot of the crime, or a lot of the homicides, if you will, those are challenges that are kind of inherent to our community that we really need the officers, but it's also data that would support it. So I don't believe that part is expendable. I think that we would definitely have to bridge that deficit. But aside from that, you're right. I mean, certainly more scrutiny can be given to how many officers we have in comparison on the street versus in detective bureaus and that. And so we're definitely looking at that very closely. Like I said, I've returned several officers, put several officers back in uniform already. We've done some reorganization. I've realigned some of the bureaus, and so we're working to even get more officers on the street with the officers that we have. So I think we're being definitely more efficient with the ratio between officers on the street versus in detective bureaus, and I think we'd be consistent with other major cities our size.
Also,
Yeah.
Alderwoman.
You get on the mic.
Yes, please. The chief has done a fantastic job of restructuring and sending officers back to the patrols. But with respect to the promotion, we've heard that earlier. I can tell you that that process has slowed down quite a bit. The last sergeant promotions, for example, there were 22 eligible, and I believe we promoted 11. And that was, I'm not sure whether Chief Hayden has had an opportunity to do any of that promoting that was done with the interim chief, O'Toole. And so we've slowed that down quite a bit, understanding that we need folk on the street. And you're absolutely right. We're cognizant of all of the issues that you've raised with respect to the numbers of people that are in our community, the numbers of officers that are on the police department. We just have to make sure that we have our officers in the right places. And so we don't quarrel at all with that. But at the same time, we know that we have to be able to have 128 officers. And so our problem has been that we've not been able to recruit. We've not been able to employ. We've not been able to assist them to matriculate and to graduate from our academy. We, unfortunately, we just don't have the number of people within the city of St. Louis that are interested at this time of being police.
All right. My last comment about the ability to get people prepared and be successful in the academy. Do we have a partnership with either the community college or Harris Stowe? Because their criminal justice programs are very good. And I do know that they have the capacity, as well as SLU and others, they do have the capacity to help us.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm going to say thank you to the Ethical Society of Police for their guidance and assistance in this. But sometimes you do need professional teachers when it comes to the academics of reading and math and comprehension and those types of things. And I say that because I've always said your passion is one thing, but your ability is something else that is required. And so I was hoping that maybe we're reaching out to them to get some assistance as well. And most especially, knowing that most of the young people that come out of our education systems of today, they have been dumbed down. What you need, they've been dumbed down. And it's just a shame to say that, but we know that. So they haven't been taught to do the type of research and understanding and write comprehensive reports like you need. They haven't been taught that. They're not even taught cursive writing anymore. So they're challenged when they get to us. Even if they're college graduates, they're challenged, because I deal with them all the time. So let's try to form more partnerships to get as much help as possible that doesn't cost us anything. That's my main thing.
I'm glad you mentioned Harris Stowe, because it was earlier this summer. I guess it was like 5 weeks ago. So there are several of our officers that have graduated from Harris Stowe, and so the dean of Harris Stowe was there. So we had a meeting, and certainly that partnership is being formed as far as creating a pipeline between Harris Stowe personnel and department. So that's a good one. And also, the judge mentioned that the Police Foundation is also working on establishing a partnership between the St. Louis Police Department and Harris Stowe. Harris Stowe is an excellent feeder for our agency.
Okay, excellent. I still have challenges with our budgets, but it's not your fault. So I'm just going to put it right there, okay? I'm looking at the other side of the budget. I want to know how we can bring more revenue in. So I'm done. Thank you, Chairman.
All right, thank you, Alderwoman. Appreciate it. Alderman Vaccaro.
A couple things, actually probably more than a couple. One, when you talk about what you're doing to bring overtime down, my own personal feeling, I don't care about overtime. I care about crime. What's a life worth? You talk about that you've taken apart bureaus, jump out squads or drug task force. I don't even think we have a drug task force. These are people that are out there actually helping to prevent these crimes. We can put 200 more police out there, but the issue is going to be you can't put a police on every corner. So when we talk about trying to cut a budget by eliminating people that are out there trying to prevent crime, then we become just a report writing. And that's going to take a lot of overtime because we're going to be busy. We had somebody murdered again this morning over. So I have issues with a lot of stuff. How many people right now are on the waiting list trying to become police officers? There's a waiting list. How many people are on that list?
Yes, sir. I just put so we got a class starting in starting June 11th.
Beside the class starting, how many people?
There were no other persons, so there were 3 people left on the list, so we picked 25 persons, and there were no other persons that were available at this stage that have done all the clearances at that stage. So I was presented with 28 names. I picked 25 for the class starting on June 11th. So there is no waiting list for all intents and purposes.
So people keep coming up to me telling me they've applied, but they can't get anywhere, that they sit on the list?
Yeah, well, it depends, sir. It depends on why they aren't being considered. I mean, that could, a lot of people, although nice people, a lot of them may have had some issues that pretend maybe related to their criminal history or other issues that are part of the criteria to become an officer.
Okay, well, like I said, for my part, I don't think trying to figure out how we're going to get rid of overtime is the issue or the problem in our city. I don't think eliminating like I said, the gang violence task force or the drug task force that are out there actually preventing crimes.
Yes, sir. Well, to that point, we did go in a different direction, and so some of those officers that were in unmarked units, plainclothes positions, we put those in uniform positions. So we have a new that'll be starting in a week or so. We have a new mobile reserve unit, and even though there's a temporary reorganization of the narcotics, again to go to a different direction. So we're going to focus more on violent drug traffickers and the flow of drugs in the city. So we're realigning. So in other words, to reorganize, there's a few week delay. But we will still have a drug unit that's going to focus on enforcement as well as intervention.
Okay, because maybe I'm mishearing you then, because I thought you said you're taking a lot of the investigative units apart and putting them in uniform.
Not all. So special operations had a violent offenders. Special operations had a violent offenders arm, and it also had a narcotics arm. Some of those persons went back in uniform. But we're going to reestablish a uniform patrol. So in other words, we would talk about visibility, and so we're going to have a 10-person mobile reserve unit that's going to be in uniform from those people that were placed back in the district, and we're also going to carve out a new drug enforcement unit that's going to focus on long-term violent drug traffickers and intervention.
Okay.
So in other words, we're going a different direction. I mean, I think when you say eliminate, is as though I'm not cognizant of the usefulness or the utility when they were there. We just went to a different direction, sir, but it put more officers back in uniform.
Well, for my part, spend as much as it takes if we eliminate crime. Otherwise, let's just put a price on life and say, well, if we save so much money, well, a few extra people die, so be it. Or should we be out there trying to save lives at whatever cost? And that's just where I'm at. The other thing, when you mentioned the officers that last week they had their trial, so what happens with them? Are they back on the force then, or they're not?
No, they're still suspended without pay, sir.
So what will happen if they were acquitted, if I
Well, I
understand
guess
what you're saying?
if they challenge their suspension, then ultimately they'll have to come before the Civil Service Commission.
I'm just
But
curious.
I have no
That was a
intentions of-
curious question.
Based on what I know about that case, I have no intention of bringing them back. Now, they certainly they are entitled to the right to fight for their jobs, but there's no reason why I would want to retain somebody accused of theft with the proper amount of evidence.
Okay, and then, really, that's about it. Just, like I say, when I sit here and listen that, you've done this to cut overtime, and you've done this, in my mind, I keep thinking, what is a life worth? And really, I'm not the only one in this budget committee, but
Right.
I can tell you, I want you to spend as much as it takes to save a life.
I will add, I mean, and I've been keeping, since I know this is going to always be something that's a recurring issue, I will add that I've been tracking the homicides one by one. So we're one over today than we were this time last year. We're at 67 today. This time last year we had 66. But I think the one thing that I've been sharing with everybody is the very personal nature of many of these homicides. And so from scene indications, I would tell you that 29 of those have been drug related, 10 have been domestic, and 18 are vendetta. And so that's 57 out of the 67. And like I said, the remaining 10 could fit in one of those categories, but going by scene indication. So the point I'm trying to make is, the domestic would be challenging to intervene in, the personal vendettas will be challenging to intervene in, and the reason why we're focusing on open air drug markets is because we know there's a correlation between violent crime and drug activity. So the things that we believe we can do something about in particular is why we're focusing on drug activity.
Well, and we could go around all day, but $10 million in overtime, how much you think the city has lost in revenue because people are scared to come into the city and people don't buy houses in the city? The revenue is way beyond any overtime, but we can go around all day. I'm not, that's certainly not, but there's a bigger cost. And of course, this will be brought up when our prosecutor's in. There's a bigger cost to the city in revenue when, in a lot of cases, the police are doing their job. And I believe that. And the people are not being prosecuted for whatever reason or, so I have issues all over the
Okay,
place.
well, we'll deal with that
Right, well,
Thursday.
I understand. I'm still talking about the
Jumping
budget.
tracks now. Let's stay with the police department. Okay, thank you. We'll deal with the circuit attorney Thursdays. Are you finished?
So these are my issues. Again, the cost to the city goes way beyond whatever the overtime that you're talking about. We need to be worried more about how we're putting people out there, how we're doing what we're doing, and getting this to the finish line. 67, no matter how you want to break it down, people are not looking at that as, oh, well, these guys are, whatever. A life is a life.
Thank you very much, Alderman Vaccaro. We're very cognizant of all the issues that you raised, and certainly we agree that there might be, I'm sure that there is a significant cost that's not necessarily associated with some of the things that we're trying to do. We have a strong, excellent police department, professionals that go out and they do their jobs every single day. We also understand the analytics. We understand the data. And so that's the reason we're trying to address some of these heavy drug areas, put police officers back out on the street. One of the things that I focus on is that we have to be present. And we have to be present. Optics matter. So when these officers are in uniform and if they're in your communities, that tend to be a deterrent in and of itself. And so to have officers running around, too many of them running around undercover, it just really doesn't serve the purpose that we're trying to serve, and that is to address serious offenses head on. And we've been very, very blessed to be able to have the officers that we have that love being police and love our city and working extremely hard to make sure that that's done. Additionally, again, I can't overstate the impact of the partnership that we've had with our federal partners. Just 2 weeks ago, there were over 140 officers brought into our city from around the country to help us with violent offenders. Our federal partners arrested 157 violent offenders in the city of St. Louis. So I want this committee to know that these officers are working very hard. Every day I have a conversation with the chief asking him for more. Can you do more? Can you do more? I can tell you that nobody's slacking with respect to the St. Louis Police Department. Of course, we are confronted with something that we can't control. We cannot control the overtime. We could not control the unrest. Certainly people have a right to their constitutional rights, and we respect that. But at the same time, we're working extremely hard to do the things that you would ask any police department to do, and that is to serve, to protect, and to keep our city safe.
Okay, all right, thank you. Alderwoman Howard.
I just have a few questions, and Chief Hayden and Judge Edwards, I appreciate the job you do, and I expect that as you carry forward, you are carrying out best practice for policing for our city, and I think it's important to understand the city of St. Louis is not the only city in the United States experiencing such violent crime. Whatever is going on in society saturates the fabric of every city and every society, be it small city or large city. And I'm not saying that's an excuse. We do need to address it, and lives are important, and losing lives every day and waking up and hearing that news is daunting. Along with that, you mentioned that the pay for our first line communications, the
Yes, ma'am.
dispatchers, is sorely behind that of the county. Will they be included on this raise that's coming up from Prop P?
No, ma'am, they will not.
That's a concern to me, because I think when people call and they get put on hold, and I get this complaint frequently, it's really, is there any way that there might be some money found for, to recruit more dispatchers and retain them? I guess
Ma'am, my name is David Daniels. I'm the fiscal manager. What would be helpful would perhaps be a reclassification of those positions and raising their grade. Okay? That might be of some assistance.
how does that get done? Is that something you can do internally or through personnel?
No, that has to be done by the Department of Personnel.
Okay. So are we down in that department also, or are we fully staffed in the dispatchers?
I think we may be down in that. but
And you,
We may be down. The bigger issue that I see is that it seems like we're kind of churning through dispatchers.
so the turnover
Yes.
is exorbitant, okay. Because when you get people and engage the community to report crime, and they call and they get put on hold or they don't get service, it makes the face of the department look inefficient at best. And I think that's a real concern that needs to be addressed. Also, the computers, the in-car computers, how are we planning on addressing that issue? Or is there a plan? I think you said 740,000 to
Yes, ma'am.
replace those.
So, well, while we requested the funding, we did not receive the funding, so the funding would have been in the line item 5435.
Okay.
There's 54,000 in there. That's not really nearly enough.
Okay. 54,000,
Right.
okay. And that was cut by about 200,000.
Alderwoman,
But that still would not have taken up what you needed.
To really replace all of the laptops with the additional components unnecessary, it'd be about $740,000. But we're hoping to replace some this year.
So phasing it in, rolling them in, okay.
Alderwoman, we will try to phase in those items, but at the same time, we'll make an appeal to the foundation to see what, if anything, that it might be able to do to assist us in this area. And I can tell you that the foundation has been wonderful to the police department. Without the foundation, the police department would not have the essentials that it has. In fact, most of the police budget is all about salary and not about the
Right.
essentials like holsters and guns and vests
Yes.
that our officers use. And so the foundation has been terrific. And so we would have to make yet
An
another
appeal.
appeal to it for this type of support.
I think they are wonderful to us and the city and the officers, and I appreciate that. And then finally, on the recruitment of officers and retention, when we move people up the career ladder by promotion, there is a career ladder for police officers, I take it?
Yes, ma'am. There's officers can, some have chosen two different tracks. Some have just wanted to be, some people always want to be a homicide detective or a SWAT detective, that type of thing, and then others, take the promotional testing. So not everybody wants to be
What about the patrolman that just wants to be a patrolman? Does he rise? I mean,
Yeah, there's a step increase on an annual basis, but but there are persons that want to do that as well. Dave, you want to add something?
Okay. Unfortunately, we are kind of stuck in some history here. So there is a pay matrix for officers. However, and this probably started in the maybe 60s or so, most of the pay raises that an officer receives is in the first 9 years. After that, it's a couple $100s a year. And so while it would be nice to have an even increment between each step in the matrix,
and longevity.
that transition would cost a pretty penny.
But I guess what the question would be is, when we're looking at promoting people, would it be prudent to look at, the number of promotions we have versus giving people that are long-term and retaining them over, 10 years, 20 years? Because, we can hire new officers all the time, but there's nothing like the seasoned officer that does a good job to have that square head, that good head on the shoulders in all situations. So would there be any benefit to looking at the number of promotions versus how we can fund that?
So I would say that the seniority does matter. So seniority matters with respect to assignments as well
Right.
as well as promotions. So seniority is taken into consideration on both levels.
Okay.
And so certainly that's a part of the process. And in fact, it goes a little farther on the officer level. Actually, the so to speak, the senior person, unless there's all things being considered, the senior person will get the job if it's about a specialized assignment.
I'm not worried about. I'm kind of the bent that we need worker bees. Not everybody can be in charge, and I just want to know that we're incentivizing that as a career path rather than promoting people just because that's the only way they can get a raise.
Yes, ma'am. When I sit on the officer level, so the Police Officers Association, it's part of our CBA, our collective bargaining agreement, that a person that has more time on is going it'll still be a worker bee, but it'll be in a specialized assignment. So they get first right of refusal, so to speak.
Right. I get that, which is a privilege of longevity. But at the same time, I don't feel like, I guess what I'm trying to say is the only way up the career ladder is to be promoted from sergeant to lieutenant to, on up that way.
Yeah, yes and no, because depending on what assignment it is.
What the
For
goal
example,
is,
like
yeah.
homicide, for example.
Okay.
They can make quite a bit of money investigating a case if that's what if it's just
Right.
money comparison. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. That's all I have, and I want to let you know I appreciate your service and the men you lead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Hey, Alderwoman.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. I said, first of all, Chief, in your honor, I want to thank you for your service. And I said, please convey my support to all the officers, the entire police department. I know firsthand what you go through. My husband served for 37 years. Just one quick question. I said, is there a minimum time an officer is required to serve before he has to, I guess, pay back the cost of his training or education? 4 years?
Yes, ma'am, 4 years.
Okay. And then the other thing, I know we always go on about like the population going down in the city of St. Louis. It has gone down over the years. But have the calls for service gone down? And that's the crux of the matter.
No, ma'am, they haven't.
That's what I thought.
And in fact, we have a new commander of our communications division, Major Dan Howard, and we also have a new captain. Both of them have been in communications over, in the past, have been commanders of that unit in the past. And so we're looking very closely at the calls, and we're responding to compared to calls that similar cities, similarly situated, So to make sure that we're able to put officers on the street for longer periods of time and not bogged down with something that, no other city is going to.
Okay, thank you, that's all.
All right, thank you, Alderwoman. We have Alderwoman Sharon Tice. She had a few questions that she'd like to ask. Go ahead.
Morning, Judge
Alderwoman.
Edwards, Chief Hayden, who I know very well, both of you, and Mr. Daniels.
Yes.
And what is your position, I'm sorry,
Fiscal manager,
of the police department? Okay, or public safety, which one is it? It's the police?
please.
Okay. You guys will be hearing from me. I'm the chair of public employees, which means I have your pay raise in my hand today, okay? But I wanted to come because I have been watching this whole thing about the overtime play out in the press. I'm very unhappy with that. I agree with the alderman from the 23rd when he says we want to have policing done, and if it costs that much, it costs that much, but I don't want to see waste. That's the problem. And out in my community, I'm hearing people say, how are they getting away with that? And they were not happy with the fact that they saw this one gentleman got off, okay? And so I want to ask this question. Just because you get off on a criminal matter, that doesn't mean that you follow correct police procedures. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and that often happens even when an officer may get found not guilty, but violate all kind of police rules.
Absolutely.
And when that happens sometime, especially in a very famous case that just happened last September, the city ends up paying a lot of money civilly. Is that right? Do you know
Yes,
about-
ma'am. There are times when the city ends up paying money civilly. Yes.
Right. And in fact, we got a couple of more $1 million put in our budget, which I'm very much opposed to, for settling civil matters, which the police is not going to like this. I want to tell you this now. I'm investigating how we make the police responsible when you're doing things criminally and the citizens are having to pay millions and millions of dollars. So I've been investigating. As an attorney, if I practice law, I have to have insurance. If the doctor practices, they have to have insurance. I don't want police to have to pay insurance for what they do that's legal, but I think at some point in time, we may have to look at having some kind of insurance for when you do something that breaks the law instead of the citizens of the city of St. Louis having to pay that added burden, especially when we have so many other public safety matters, such as tearing down vacant buildings. We're not even going to get into the policing. So I think that's the concern. It's not that we don't want the police to have all the overtime that they deserve. I want people to be paid correctly. I do not want them to be paid incorrectly.
Yes, ma'am.
And it very much concerns me when I feel like the police are playing a game and stealing from them. That's stealing to me. When you turn in overtime that you didn't
Absolutely.
do, that's stealing.
That's stealing to me as well.
Okay, and it can be a felony stealing too.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, so I wanted to get into this thing about police officer criteria. I have a young man who's been trying to be a policeman for a long time that lives in the ward right around the corner from me, and he loves the police. He wants to be one. He stutters. He's been working on it, and he's gotten a lot better. And so I'm just trying to figure out if that really was an actual criteria, was that just the prior police chief that was doing that?
No, stuttering would not eliminate you. If you had a speech impediment, that would not eliminate you from the process.
Okay, because he has gotten a lot better, and he's worked on it. I know many great people that have stuttered, and I don't usually get into it. You know, you and I have been dealing for a long time, and I don't call police for anything except for the police. I don't try to get politically into it. I don't try to place my friends. You know that about me, okay? I'm very much go to the end of the street, cross at the crosswalk person, okay? So
I would be
haven't-
glad to look at him individually if you could send me an email or something. I would. But
I'll tell him to reapply again and see if that's
Okay.
still going on, because I don't want it to be Sharon Tyus is doing it. I want him to get it himself.
Alderwoman, let me just say with respect to some of the prior issues in terms of applying for the police department. Chief Hayden and I have had lots of conversations with personnel, and we are going backward, looking at 2 and 3 years of past applicants, and those that were unsuccessful because of testing. We're asking our personnel director to go back and invite them. We're taking the initiative to invite them to reapply because we think that if we can provide the appropriate tutoring and the mentorship, perhaps some of those folk will be able to be police officers. We're doing everything possible to invite folk to apply, and then we want to help those people matriculate and hopefully graduate and become police officers in the city of St. Louis. So we are revisiting, if you will, many of those applicants. Now, those that would not qualify because of criminal reasons and criminal histories, of course, we cannot do that or
Right.
will not do that. But I just want to assure you that we are revisiting. We're taking the initiatives ourselves to call out to folk and say, hey, you applied 2 years ago. We know that for whatever reasons you were unsuccessful. Please take another look at us because we're interested in having you to be a police in the city of St. Louis.
Well, and I'm glad you said that because I've been talking to Mr. Frank since I became the chair of public employees a few months ago about when I first came here. So there's no one here that was before me. I only lost my seniority because of gerrymander. But in 91, when I first got here in the fire department, just to give you a little history, fire department used to have a test in which entry fire level people, 50% was if you could do the physical test. During that time, and black firefighters were really coming in at a high rate, and we were very proud of it, and we were getting black firefighters. Someplace during that time period in the next 5-7 years, they changed it and made the written test more important than the physical test. Now, I don't understand that because I don't care if you can read or not. If you can get me out of a fire, that's what I care about, okay? Now, maybe when you get to be a captain or something like that. So I've been talking to Mr. Franks about it in personnel because somebody made that decision to have somebody come in and give that opinion, okay, is that it was more important for an entry-level fire person to be able to take a test than it was to actually do the physical work. And that made a decrease in African Americans coming in.
Yeah,
And
I
so,
suspect that I'm going to be asked that question when I get to the fire department's budget.
Oh.
But I'll be happy to answer it now.
oh, no, you're going to be, because I'm going to have you gentlemen come before my committee to talk about it, okay? I just want to give you a heads up because you said that. What I'm saying is a lot of times people have been turned away. You talk about being able to recruit because they've had such bad experiences in trying to get into, and these are people who want to live in the city, who already live in the city, who love the city. And so I found that kind of, I was disappointed because both the fire chief and the police chief both got double promotions to get into their positions. So it's interesting to me how people can put things into place when they themselves didn't go through the proper procedure. This is the chief is my 7th police chief that I've worked with. I started with Police Chief Sheets. That's when I started. That's how long ago it was. So I've worked with each police chief. And so when people get to jump over other people and then they stand right there, kind of reminds me of a Supreme Court justice and say, I don't believe in that. That's a problem that I have. And so looking at how you're doing your testing procedure and going back and looking at people who have been turned down before, I think is an excellent idea.
I think Chief Hayden has done a tremendous job of leading on that, in that area of personnel. I can tell you that the greatest impact, however, with respect to fire, has not necessarily been testing, but it was the 50-50 agreement that was struck down by the courts. And so that's an issue.
Reverse discrimination case,
Yes,
which
that's-
the city then did not challenge, which that was done purposeful, and they should have challenged that. They should have appealed that.
Well, I don't have the benefit of knowing that, but I can tell you that the greatest impact with respect to fire
Correct.
was the legal challenge and struck down the 50-50. But certainly we'll have an opportunity to elaborate on that whenever you wish.
Okay, and then the other thing I wanted to ask about, I wanted to say, people talk about all these problems we have in the city. That's politically created. That is not police created. That is long-term systemic problems that politics have played. Everybody wants to accuse the police of things. This is our problem. Politicians created this. We did all kind of things that were wrong. We do not make correct decisions, and then we act like that doesn't have long-term effects, okay? I was here and voted no on the Rams deal. The reason I voted no on the original Rams deal was the very thing why the Rams left. I talked for hours about how can you leave this loophole that would let the Rams leave in a certain amount of years if we don't have a stadium. Everybody said, oh, no, the Rams wouldn't do that. Well, first-year law student would know, yes, they would, okay? So we do all kind of things and then we come to the police and say, now you fix it. It's our problem. It is not yours. I know you do the best thing. I grew up I'm a military family, police family. I've been very supportive, you know that, and I am. If the police are not doing right, I am hard on that, but if you're doing right, I've been there for raises and everything else, so I know this is our problem, not yours, okay? I do want to bring up something that bothers me. The VP fair, whatever they call it, during the fair, so many of the police have taken out of the communities and at the fair. I find that very unfair to the community. I know this is a political decision, and I'm letting it be known politically that I think that is a mistake. We're going to have to do some different things about how we police these big time. Most certainly we deserve the police, but when you take all of the police out of the community, that leaves us vulnerable, okay?
We have been, I know for a fact we've been trending down on that. I mean, so compared to this time 10 years or so ago, we're supplying definitely less officers. We will continue to scrutinize that to make sure that only officers that are needed out there will be attending that.
But they will argue, and politicians will argue, we need them, and it is a great event. I like it,
Right.
but, and I've said it to them, so I'm not saying, I'm not the person to hold her tongue. They need to hire their own, some security guards and things. We cannot afford, and I think most politicians at this board won't say what Sharon Ties will say out loud. They should be hiring their own. We should not be taking it out.
Madam Alderwoman, the irony of it is, I got a letter and I was criticized because we had law enforcement officers at the May Day parade 2 weeks ago, and so, and I believe that that's an issue that folk all over the city will raise. Why is it that we have officers at these various parades? And so that's something that we should consider, and I'm happy to report that that the parade was a safe parade, and the officers were there. But I certainly understand the criticism, and trust me, the chief and I have been out all over the city, and I think I've gone to at least 74, 75 ward meetings and special meetings, and the criticism are the same. And so we recognize that, and we're certainly trying to fix it.
So I want to say that, again, is something we need to address politically. I know that it's hard, because if the police are called, they're going to come, okay? The May Day parade I don't go to, and I'm friends with all the people who run it because they moved it off of Natural Bridge because they said it was a shooting. As soon as they got downtown, I called up all the people. They're my friends, because you and I know we're friends with the same people. And I said, oh, I see, they had a shooting downtown. So I guess you're going to move from downtown. So for my own protest, I don't go to it, because you don't take everything, you know how I am about North St. Louis. You don't take things positive from North St. Louis. So I don't go to the Annie Malone parade. I went to it when it was all up and down around Sumner and everything. But back to the point is that I would also be opposed to them having. If you're going to have these parades, you're going to have to start, you cannot rely on the police to do all of this. They're going to have to start paying for and hiring their own security.
I agree.
I had one other question here. Oh, first, and again, I want to also thank you for all that you all do. I think you're fantastic people. I think the police chief will tell you that one of the first times he heard police chief was at a ward meeting that he came to. I told him that a long time ago, shh, don't tell nobody, but you're going to be the police chief. So congratulations again. And, I already love you, Judge Edwards. Okay. And Mr. Daniels, I look forward to working with you, and thank you for everything that you do. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Alderwoman. We want to thank you, gentlemen, for coming in. We appreciate it. You need to be commended for the hard work that you're doing for the city of St. Louis, and we really appreciate it. So, again, thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
So we'll stand, Ways and Means will stand adjourned. Thank you.